I want to start by having you all take a long, slow, deep breath and think about what you know about healthy living. I bet many of you are going to go right to the things that are on the screen. Healthy exercise, healthy eating, a healthy environment, or in that picture, an unhealthy environment. But I think very few of you would go to healthy buildings. And I think that's a mistake, and here's why. We are an indoor species, like it or not. We spend 90% of our time indoors. To put this another way, calculate your indoor age. Take your age and multiply it by 0.9. That's how many years you've lived indoors. So my indoor age is 44. It's younger than my actual age. You can figure out how old I am. When we think about it this way, the number of years we spend inside, if we live till 80, 72 years breathing indoor air, it becomes obvious that the indoor environment is having a massive impact on our health, but very few people think about this when they think about healthy living. The reality is, our indoor spaces can make us sick or keep us well. So I've spent 20 years as a forensic investigator of sick buildings, a cluster of Bell's palsy in factory workers, a cancer cluster in an office tower. 4 people died in a hospital after breathing in bacteria in the air. I got a call 2 months ago from parents concerned about their kids in preschool because the school was built over a former industrial site and there were industrial chemicals seeping into the air in their school. In the past couple of weeks, I've had 2 calls from parents worried about their kids' asthma in their homes. I get calls like this every day. People get sick in buildings because we have not had health as our North Star when we think about how to design, operate, and maintain the places where we spend 90% of our time. So I'm a little sick of chasing sick buildings, so I started the Healthy Buildings program at the Harvard School of Public Health. And for the first time in my career, I'm very optimistic about what's coming. There are 5 fundamental shifts laying the foundation for a new healthy buildings era, and I'm going to share them with you. The first is this. There is a paradigm shift happening regarding our understanding of how respiratory pathogens are spread indoors. This is what's happening in every single space you spend your time. These blue tracers are particles, respiratory particles. So as I stand here speaking, I am projecting particles from my lungs. You, even though you're quiet, are also emitting these respiratory particles. They will spread around the room. Depending on how the building is designed, it could be that 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 5% of the air you're breathing right now just came out of the lungs of other people in this room. Look around. It is the equivalent of respiratory backwash. Now, if someone is sick and the particles they release will carry these infectious virus, these particles will flow and travel well beyond 6 feet, and they will fill up a room much like cigarette smoke. And this is critically important for this reason. If you think these respiratory pathogens spread on surfaces, well, then we spend all day cleaning elevator buttons like we did at the beginning of the pandemic. If you think these particles drop out of the air within 6 feet, well, then we place little circles on the floor. We tell people where to stand. But if you recognize this is happening in every space, you know that airborne transmission is happening, and that means the building becomes important. Because we can start to remove these pathogens in the air through good ventilation, and at the same time, we can also capture these particles from our lungs with good filtration. This is a paradigm shift because it's upending 70 years of medical science, which has focused on droplet precautions. But there is an awakening happening and a recognition that the dominant mode of transmission for respiratory pathogens is airborne transmission. That's COVID, that's influenza, that's RSV, and many more. That is a major shift. This is also leading to policy shifts. The second fundamental shift is a change in policy regarding ventilation rates. I was an advisor to the White House during the pandemic. I advised FEMA, I advised governors, I advised schools all around the country on this topic. And I'll give you a short history of the problem before I talk about the successes we're having. Florence Nightingale had it right. Over 150 years ago, cleanliness and fresh air from open windows, the only defense a true nurse either asks or needs. A few years later, in 1893, a physician scientist, John Shaw Billings, established the first ever health-based ventilation target of 30 cubic feet per minute per person, or 30 CFM per person. 2 years later, a building's standard-setting body adopted that health-based ventilation target. And by the 1920s, 22 states had codified a health-based ventilation target. And then in the 1970s, this standard was passed. The problem is right in the name. The standard for acceptable indoor air quality, not the standard for healthy indoor air quality, not the standard for optimal indoor air quality, the standard for merely acceptable indoor air quality. Acceptable is not acceptable when it comes to our health. This standard, set at about the time of the global energy crisis, choked off the air supply in our buildings and stopped letting our buildings breathe. These health-based ventilation targets of 30 CFM per person were dropped by half or more. We no longer set ventilation rates based on health, we set them for odor control. This standard is designed to ensure that the next person who walks in this room doesn't leave because it doesn't smell great in here because of us. It's an odor control standard. This is what has influenced ventilation rates in nearly every place you spend your time. It is not a coincidence that shortly after this was the first time we started to see the phrase sick building syndrome appear. And for the past 40 years, we have been in the sick building era. There are good changes underway. During the pandemic, I led the Lancet COVID-19 Commission Task Force on Safe Schools, Safe Work, and Safe Travel. We put forth health-based ventilation targets. Guess which ones we used? The ones from 100 years ago. CDC just recently put forth its first ever health-based ventilation target. They adopted our recommendations. Just 2 weeks ago, the California Department of Health adopted the 30 CFM per person target for schools. These are massive shifts happening. It's a course correction, correcting a 40-year mistake when we stopped designing ventilation for health. The third fundamental shift that's happening is there's an awareness shift happening. This is an article in the New York Times. Front page, for those who get physical newspapers still, A1, top of the fold. The new war on bad air. And what they're talking about here is the new war on bad indoor air. I've been in this field for 20 years. Never expected to see that in the front page of the New York Times. 60 Minutes last year covered our work on this with a story on the air we breathe inside. And I took them on a tour, and took the country on a tour, of building mechanical systems, the places that we never see in buildings, but that determine how healthy the air is in this room and every other room you spend your time. This is a mainstreaming of the healthy buildings conversation. My neighbor talks to me about building filters now. This is really different. That has never happened before. That's a good change, and we're not going back. The fourth shift is a technology and power shift. So starting on the left, you see a proliferation of these low-cost air quality sensors. And what they do is they make the invisible visible. What used to cost $5,000, a scientific instrument, now costs about $100. And people are measuring the air quality in the spaces where they spend their time. And they're sharing that information publicly, like I'm going to do right now about MIT. So the air quality in here is pretty good. Not as good as Harvard, but pretty good. If you look at the middle section here, this happened to me this summer. I was doing one of these forensic investigations of a building, checking on a building, checking the pulse of the building. And a tenant came up to me, and she said, "Oh, I have the whole building mapped out already." She had one of these air quality sensors and was telling me about the air quality in the entire building. So what happens to companies when employees know more about the air quality in the building than they do? This is a key power shift. The last part of this slide shows a new program by ARPA-H. So maybe you're familiar with DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. This is ARPA-H, so it's Advanced Research Projects for Health. They have a new program that's going to commercialize new air quality sensors for buildings, not just going to measure things like carbon dioxide or particles. They're actually going to measure and commercialize sensors that measure viruses in real time. So this future is coming quick, where the public now has access to data that they never had before, and soon they'll be telling you how much virus is in your school, your office, your hospital. The next couple of years, this is coming. Good companies are moving on this. I advise Amazon. They have rolled out indoor air quality monitoring throughout their entire corporate offices globally. Harvard has these air quality monitors at the Harvard School of Public Health, our Harvard Health Clinics, Harvard Business School. So the good companies are starting to move on this. You'll see a lot more of this. Boston Public Schools, right here, has air quality monitors in every classroom, and they share that publicly. This is a landmark shift. The fifth one is the climate shift, this fifth fundamental shift, because there has been an argument over the past 40 years in our sick building era that we have this choice between energy or health. Buildings consume 40% of global energy. Solving the climate crisis runs through our buildings. But we've been fed this either-or value proposition. It's energy or health. I reject it entirely. I wrote about this in Harvard Business Review. And I'll give you an example of a project I worked on with my friend, Lord Norman Foster, who has been talking about energy-efficient buildings, so green buildings, that are also breathable buildings for decades. And we happen to both be working on this project. This is JP Morgan's new headquarters in New York City. Next time you're there, you'll see it. Change the entire skyline. It's a gorgeous building, of course. That's what Norman does. But he pays attention to these mechanical systems, too. This building is an all-electric tower sourced with renewable energy that has double the minimum ventilation rate, designed for over 30 CFM per person, with advanced filtration and real-time monitoring in the building. This is what's coming for not only these great buildings in the middle of New York City, but coming everywhere as we adopt and develop these new standards, showing that you can have both a green building that is healthy. In fact, it is unacceptable to have an energy-efficient building where people get sick inside. It is equally unacceptable to have a healthy building that ignores our responsibility to health beyond the four walls. We've been fed this false dichotomy for 40 years. That era is over. The World Health Organization has declared clean indoor air a fundamental right. The lessons from our past, combined with recent experiences, present an unambiguous call to action to recommit to ventilation, not as a technical standard for minimally acceptable conditions, but as a cornerstone of public health. We need to demand, and we deserve, clean air in our buildings, just as we demand and expect clean water coming out of our taps. Today I've talked a lot about indoor air quality, but there's more to healthy buildings. This is a report released by my Harvard Healthy Buildings program called The 9 Foundations of a Healthy Building. We talk about air quality, water quality, lighting and views, noise and acoustics, safety and security. And when we do all of these things right in our buildings, there are many benefits. We know that kids perform better on math tests in buildings designed to healthy building standards. They perform better on reading tests. They have fewer asthma attacks. Adults perform better on cognitive function tests. They report better mental health in these buildings. They're sick less often and absent less often from work. Teachers and kids are absent less often from schools. Productivity increases for employees. Businesses see benefits to the bottom line performance when they simply improve the quality of their buildings. I want to leave you with one last thought. And I'm going to end where I started. So now take another deep breath of indoor air and reflect on this. The person who manages your building has a greater impact on your health than your doctor. Thank you.
Fantastic. That's fantastic.